The Nazca Lines, the enormous desert drawings we still can't explain. If you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing and liking the video. It truly helps the channel grow and continue to create contents like this. You ever look at something and feel your brain freeze for a second because it just doesn't make sense? That's the Nazca Lines for me. Every time. These enormous drawings stretched across the desert floor in southern Peru, perfectly straight lines, geometric shapes, spirals, animals, plants, some of them hundreds of feet long. But here's the kicker, you can barely see them from the ground. People walked among these designs for centuries without even realizing the scale of what they were standing on. The real picture only emerges when you go up, when you're in the air, looking down. And that's the moment your brain says, hold on, who was this for? And how did they make it so precise? The Nazca Lines become even stranger the more you learn. Most ancient art is made to be seen. Statues, carvings, paintings. But these were made to be looked at from above. And that's wild, because we tend to assume ancient cultures didn't think in aerial perspectives. They didn't have planes or drones. They had hills and towers, sure, but nothing high enough to really see these massive shapes clearly. Yet there they are, a giant hummingbird with perfect symmetry, a monkey with a spiral tail, a spider drawn with lengths that match real-world ratios, straight lines that run arrow-true for miles across uneven terrain. It feels intentional, purposeful, almost scientific in execution. So let's start from the ground level, literally. Imagine walking across this dry, flat desert plain. The soil here is weird. It's this rust-colored gravel layer sitting on top of lighter sand. All the Nazca people had to do was scrape away the top layer, revealing the lighter layer beneath it. Simple, right? But simple doesn't mean easy. When you stand on the ground, the lines just look like shallow trenches. You can't see the full picture. You can't tell you're standing inside a condor's wing or walking along the outline of a giant tree. So imagine designing something you yourself can't fully see. That's where the mystery deepens. We can't brush it off as random patterns or accidental formations. These were planned with precision. And the Nazca culture wasn't small. They weren't disorganized. They actually had incredible knowledge of agriculture, irrigation, astronomy. They built complex aqueducts, so they had the brains to pull something like this off. But the question remains, why this? Why enormous drawings in the desert? You get a lot of theories. Some people jump to the flashy ones. They'll say aliens, or ancient runways, or landing signals. And sure, those ideas stick around because they're fun to imagine. But you don't need aliens to make something mysterious. Humans are mysterious enough on their own. One of the most grounded theories is that the lines were ritual pathways, paths people walked during ceremonies. And suddenly the shapes make more sense. The lines aren't just drawings, they're processional tracks. Imagine groups of people walking in single file along a massive geometric shape, carrying offerings, chanting, following a symbolic path visible only to the gods above. That theory fits the culture. The Nazca people worshipped beings associated with rain, fertility, agriculture. In a desert environment where water is literally life, religion and survival were deeply intertwined. Some of the animal figures, like the hummingbird, were connected to water or seasonal change. It's possible the Nazca were drawing giant pictures meant to communicate with the sky, appealing to the forces they believed controlled the weather. But even if that's true, the scale still blows my mind. Some of these lines stretch straight across hills, dips, uneven surfaces, yet they stay unbelievably consistent in width and direction. Try drawing a straight line across a complex landscape. It's not easy. These people didn't have surveying equipment like ours, but they figured something out. They mastered perspective, geometry, planning, and maybe even a bit of early engineering. And then you've got the giant geometric shapes, the trapezoids, triangles, perfectly straight lines. Those shapes aren't decorative. They look like runways, like stages, like open corridors carved into the earth. Some of them are wide, some narrow, some stretch far beyond where any single person could see them. What were those for? You start imagining ceremonies involving hundreds of people, ritual marches, offerings burned along the lines. Maybe they believed their gods could see from above, so they shaped the earth like a canvas meant for the sky's perspective. And that idea sticks with me more than anything else. These drawings might not have been meant for human eyes at all. Imagine believing so deeply in a sky world, spirits, gods, ancestral beings, that you reshape the landscape to speak to them. You don't need to climb a tower or see the whole image yourself. You just need faith that the beings above you will see it. But here's where things get truly interesting. Some of the lines are unbelievably straight. Straight in a way that makes modern engineers pause. Over hills, across valleys, through uneven terrain, the lines barely shift. Even with today's tools, surveying a line that perfect would require careful measurement. So how did the Nazca do it? Maybe they used simple tools, ropes, stakes, triangulation. Maybe their mastery of the land was deeper than we give them credit for. People underestimate ancient intelligence all the time, but cultures like the Nazca remind us that humans have always been capable of incredible innovation. And then there's the scale of the animal figures. Some are so large that you could only see them fully from hundreds of feet in the air. Yet the proportions are accurate. The hummingbird's wing length matches its body ratio. The monkey's spiral tail, perfect geometry. The tree, branches branching in fractal-like form. No erasers, no do-overs. They nailed it on the first try. Imagine creating a drawing the size of a football field without ever seeing it from above. That's like drawing a portrait with your eyes an inch from the canvas, hoping you got the proportions right. And they did. Every time. But here's a piece of the puzzle a lot of people overlook. The Nazca Desert is one of the driest places on Earth. Virtually no rain, no erosion, no winds strong enough to disturb the lines. So once these shapes were carved, they stayed. For centuries. For millennia. It's almost like the Nazca chose that landscape on purpose. They knew the desert would preserve their message. They picked a natural time capsule. And those lines have survived nearly unchanged for 2,000 years. The Nazca people might not have written books, but they wrote messages into the earth itself. Messages that last longer than languages, longer than cultures, longer than cities. But messages to whom? That's the question that keeps coming back. Some say they're astronomical. When you map the lines, certain patterns line up with stars or solstice events. Maybe the lines were giant calendars or celestial markers. Others believe they mark underground water sources. And that makes sense too. Water was life. If you could map it, ritualize it, worship it, you would. Then there's the possibility that the lines were part of a multi-layered belief system. Art, astronomy, ritual, and agriculture all mixed together. Humans rarely do anything for just one reason. And maybe that's why we struggle to interpret the Nazca lines today. They were never meant to have a single meaning. Maybe each line and shape served a purpose depending on the season, the ritual, the clan, the god, the moment. Fragments of symbols in a worldview we no longer have access to. The Nazca lines force us to confront something most people don't like to admit. We don't know everything about ancient civilizations. We barely know anything, in fact. A whole culture lived, thrived, created incredible art, shaped the landscape itself, and then disappeared. And what they left behind are cryptic, beautiful marks in the earth that we're still trying to decode. You stand there on that endless, rust-colored plain, heat shimmering off the ground, the sky stretching in every direction, and you realize you're surrounded by shapes that were never meant for human eyes at ground level. That alone reshapes the whole experience. These lines don't feel like they were made for people standing here. They feel like messages meant for something higher, something looking down. But before we drift too far into the philosophical side, let's talk about the logistics, because honestly, the engineering behind the Nazca lines is one of the most impressive aspects. Imagine you're trying to draw a perfect straight line for a mile on uneven terrain, without a ruler, without a drone or an aerial vantage point, while standing inside the line itself. How? How do you keep that line arrow straight? While some researchers think they used simple sighting techniques, 2 wooden stakes placed at far distances, lined up carefully, then moved forward as the workers progressed. It's basically early surveying, and even though it sounds simple, it requires an insane amount of precision. You're not just dragging a stick across dirt. You're coordinating a team, maintaining consistent width, compensating for hills and dips, and dealing with the desert wind, drying out your materials. And then there are the curves, which are somehow even more exact. Look at the hummingbird. Its beak is a razor-straight line, its wings perfectly symmetrical. The monkey's spiral tail is a mathematically tight curve. The spider's legs are evenly spaced and proportioned. If any of these were off by even a little, a whole design would collapse visually. And yet these ancient artists nailed it. That alone tells us something big. This culture had a deep understanding of measurement and geometry, maybe not in a textbook sense, but in a practical, instinctive, passed down through generations kind of way. They weren't guessing, they were executing a vision. Now let's talk about the purpose again, because this part of the mystery is my favorite. When you dive into the Nazca culture, you find a people living in one of the driest regions on Earth. The desert looks lifeless at first glance, but it hides water deep underground, water that was absolutely essential. The Nazca built incredible aqueducts called puquios, spiraling stone structures that funneled wind underground to push water through canals. These things still work today. Let that sink in. They engineered water systems in one of the harshest climates, and they still function 2,000 years later. So when you combine that with the lines, geometric shapes radiating across the plain, figures that seem tied to rain, fertility, and agricultural cycles, you start to see a picture forming. Maybe the lines were rituals for water. Maybe they were spiritual contracts with nature. Maybe the desert was their canvas, and the sky was their audience. I love imagining the ceremonies that might have happened here. Picture people walking slowly in long procession, following the lines like pathways laid out by the gods. Incense burning, music echoing, offerings placed at turning points. Maybe each line represented a journey, physical, spiritual, or both. Or imagine this. The Nazca people believed the sky was filled with powerful beings, creatures like hummingbirds, condors, monkeys, spiders, each guardian of certain natural forces. Drawing these figures in the earth could have been a way of speaking to those beings, inviting their presence, asking for rain or protection or abundance. And maybe that's why the designs are so huge, not for humans to see, for the sky itself. But the mystery doesn't stop there. The Nazca Lines aren't just drawings, they're part of a system. Across the desert are thousands of lines, polygons, pathways, shapes both recognizable and abstract. Some overlap, some intersect, some run parallel. It's like a giant circuit board, a map, a coded message. But to what? And here's something that blows my mind every time. Different shapes seem to cluster in different regions. Animals in one area, spirals in another, rays in another, trapezoids scattered throughout. This isn't random. It hints at zones, ritual zones, directional zones, symbolic territories carved into the landscape. Archaeologists have spent decades trying to link each shape to a meaning, but the truth is, the Nazca didn't leave a Rosetta Stone. They left images, and images can shift meaning depending on context. Maybe the spider represented fertility because spiders appear before rain. Maybe the monkey represented water because its spiral tail mirrored the shape of whirlpools. Maybe the hummingbird symbolized the coming of spring, or maybe each figure meant something personal to the people who carved it. Symbols aren't static, they're alive, they evolve, they're understood differently by each generation. Another theory, and this one I find fascinating, is that the Nazca used the lines for astronomy. The desert sky is unbelievably clear at night. Some lines align with solstice points, others seem to point to constellations or star paths. It's easy to imagine priests or astronomer shamans using these lines as giant calendars, walking them at specific times of the year, marking seasonal changes through ritual and movement. And honestly, maybe that's the key to understanding the Nazca Lines. They weren't static art pieces, they were experiences. You don't just look at them, you move through them. You follow the lines, you walk the shapes, you become part of the symbol. It's like each drawing was a story you lived rather than read. But let's talk about something even stranger, the changes over time. The Nazca didn't build all the lines at once. They built them over generations. Some lines cut over older lines. Some animals are newer than others. This means the meaning of the lines evolved. The culture adapted. The rituals shifted. Imagine inheriting a landscape where your ancestors carved messages into the earth. You grow up with these shapes, you walk beside them, you internalize their meaning. But when the world around you changes, when drought hits, when new leaders rise, when new gods gain prominence, you carve new lines. You adapt the sacred geography. It turns the Nazca Desert into something like a giant multi-generational journal, a cultural record, a spiritual palimpsest. And here's something that often gets overlooked. The Nazca Lines weren't hidden. They weren't secrets. They were part of everyday life, visible in small sections for nearby hills, known by every family, integrated into the culture. Everyone knew they were there, but no single person ever saw the full picture. That's the part that gives me chills. Like writing a message you'll never personally read, trusting someone else, maybe someone divine, to understand it. It makes me wonder how they perceived themselves. Did they see their lives as part of a vast cosmic system? Did they believe the gods could see them from above? Did they picture the sky as a living audience? Maybe this was their way of connecting heaven and earth. And then, somewhere along the timeline, the culture changed. The rituals faded. The people moved on. Climate shifts hit hard. The rivers dried. The Nazca civilization declined. The desert reclaimed their homes. And the lines, silent, untouched, waited for centuries. Imagine how many people walked over them without realizing they were inside drawings the size of football fields. How many travelers had no idea they were stepping through the outline of a hummingbird wing or crossing the path of a giant geometric corridor. Then, thousands of years later, humans suddenly took to the sky. Planes flew above Peru, and someone looked down and said, "What is that?" It's almost poetic. The moment we gained the ability to see from above was the moment the Nazca Lines revealed themselves fully, a message across time, waiting for humans to grow tall enough to read it. That's the part of this story that always gets me emotionally. The Nazca didn't know airplanes would ever exist. They didn't know satellites would someday image their land. But they built these shapes anyway, for gods, for rituals, for stories, for reasons we may never fully understand. And in the end, they accidentally created art that would only be truly visible thousands of years later, when our species evolved the technology to see it. That gives the Nazca Lines this strange, beautiful dual identity. They're ancient, but they feel futuristic. They're grounded, but they're meant for the sky. They're simple, but also incredibly complex. They're a reminder that humans have always dreamed big, always tried to speak to forces beyond our reach, always tried to leave something behind that mattered. And maybe that's the real core of the Nazca mystery. Not how the lines were made, not even why, but what they reveal about us as a species. We strive to be seen. We strive to be remembered. We strive to communicate across time and distance. Maybe the Nazca Lines are just one of the earliest, most ambitious expressions of that universal human impulse, the desire to connect with something bigger than ourselves. And thousands of years later, here we are, still looking, still wondering, still listening to the messages carved into the desert floor. The Nazca Lines are still speaking. We're just trying to learn the language.